So, welcome to this short webinar on integrating the ISOs 9000 for quality, 14,000 environmental, and 45,000 occupational health and safety. So, a little bit about CertiKit. So, we're a leading creator of compliance toolkits and a provider of ISO services. We're based in Belper in Derbyshire in the UK. We've been around since 2010 and helped around about 4,000 plus customers globally achieve the compliance to whatever standard they're looking at. We specialise in ISO standards and data protection, GDPR for both Europe and UK, and Cyber Essentials. And the purpose of what we're here for is to try and make compliance as easy as possible for people like you to attain the certification that you want. A little bit about me, I'm Ted. I'm one of CertiKit's 2 compliance consultants. I consult predominantly for 9001, and 22301, and I assist current customers with their implementation and any queries they've got on attaining certification, and also new customers who are looking towards going for certification. I'm also a technical author and I assist in developing the toolkits and documentation that goes with them. I'm a certified 9001, 45, 22301 and just recently 27001 lead auditor with a lot of experience over the last 20 years in many different sectors. And for my sins, I'm also a black belt Lean Six Sigma practitioner, which comes in handy when you're looking at mapping processes, etc. So, a quick agenda of what we're going to be doing today. It's not going to be a long webinar, but hopefully it's going to be interesting, give you some food for thought. We're going to be looking at why it's easy to integrate ISO management systems, the first steps of integrating the management systems, looking for common grounds to make it easier for ourselves. We're going to look at integrated gap assessments, integrated policies and procedures, internal audits and management reviews, and then finally we'll have a summary of what we just covered. As we go through this webinar, there will be a poll at some point with 4 or 5 questions on there. If you'd like to take part in that, all you need to do is select the answer you want and then submit the press the submit button to give us your results. But first, before we start, how popular is IMS, Integrated Management Systems? I've been doing ISO implementation for about 15, 16 years. And I would say in the past 8 years, integrated management systems are slowly becoming more and more popular. What we have seen lately, and I've just done a quick search on the internet, these are the sort of numbers we're looking at companies for integrated management systems at the moment. We're looking at around about 16,000 for the UK. This is about 18 months old, this data, and I've got this from the ISO itself, plus UCAS and Pan-Pacific accreditation areas. So around about 16,000 in the last about 18 months ago. That has gone up exponentially. Europe's 140,000. North America, that's America and Canada, is 160,000. South America 40,000. Asia 250,000, and Australia, New Zealand 20,000. Asia is big because the country with the greatest number of ISO certifications is actually China, so there's a big chunk of that. But what we are seeing is that more and more people are looking to integrate their management systems for ease. So and that's what we're going to cover today, is to look at how we are going to integrate these systems and how easy it is to integrate them. So, why is it easy to integrate management systems? Well, the ISO, or the International Organization for Standardization, developed a new standard for ISO systems back in 2015, and this was the Annex SL format. Prior to that, every management system was individually crafted and they had their own sort of formats and they didn't gel. And I started in this when that was the case, and trying to integrate management systems then led to me going grey and pulling a lot of hair out. It was really, really difficult. But with this new development, the Annex SL format, management systems since 2015 have all been documented in the same format, and we'll see the format in a second. Format consists of 10 clauses. All the clauses are titled the same, and then there are many subclauses within each clause that are very similar or the same. There are some subclauses that are unique to each management system. Obviously, the quality ones are going to be looking at quality requirements, health and safety, etc., etc. However, the main clause titles are the same, so it starts to make our job and your job, if you're looking at integration, a lot simpler. So as I said, it allows the integration management systems to be done a lot easier. You can actually identify common ground here, common areas that can be worked to cover management integration a lot easier. So a way to look at this, we'll do this pictorial. This is looking at the three systems and the actual format of the documents. So we've got on the left 9001, in the middle 14,000 environmental, and on the right 45,000. If you look down on 9001 on the left, you see 1, 2, 3, they're all brown, same as the other two, they're all brown. Scope, normative reference, terms and definitions. This is background information, and then when you go for certification, you do not get certified against those clauses. You only get certified from 4 down. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are the clauses that you would get audited against. So if we look across the three of them, clause 4, context of organisation, context of organisation, and context of organisation, it's exactly the same. And the same goes for leadership. Number 5, planning, support, operation, performance, improvement. All the main clauses are entitled the same. However, the big difference is clause 4 on all of them contain the same sub requirements, the same sub clauses, the same within leadership. They have the same sub clauses. In planning, clause 6, there are slight differences, but they're very, very similar. I think if I remember right, in 9001, in clause 6, we have 5 requirements. In 14,001, we have 4, and in 45, we have 5 again. There's a couple exactly the same. 6.1, 6.2 are the same. 6.3 is the same. 6.4 is slightly different, and 6.5 is slightly different. It's exactly the same with support. In 9001, within the support, in 7.1, which is looking at resources, 9001 goes into it a lot deeper than the other two. However, in the other two, in 7.1, it is still resources, but the requirements are slightly different. The same goes for performance evaluation and improvement, exactly the same. The big difference in all of the standards is clause 8. This is the meat of all the standards, this clause. The most requirements out of the three of them in clause 8 is in 9001. The operational side, because they are looking at design, planning, review, pre-sales, post-sales, customer support, customers' property, etc., are all in there. Whereas you look in 14,000 and 45,000, they are looking at compliance and actions to address the aspects and impacts in 14,001 and hazards and risks in 45,001. So as you can see, the format is very similar across. A lot of the clauses are very similar. It's only when you get into clause 6, 7, and 8 there are, well, 6 and 7 there's slight differences, but 8 is the one that's going to have the big change, a big mix-up. But again, there are similar things in that as well. The first steps, there are a number of first steps that I would recommend anybody who's looking at this. First of all, you need to clearly define what you want, why you want it, and the most important thing is to get senior management buy-in. I have worked with countless numbers of companies where they've got the go-ahead to go and implement 9014 or whatever it is. The management has signed off on it, and then the management wipe their hands of it and leave it to the other people. It doesn't work like that. Management, senior management must be involved from the start and then throughout. It's important, and it's important that you get the buy-in at the very beginning, because without that buy-in, you're not going to get the resources you need, you're not going to get the support you need, you're not going to get the push you need to get this through. Set up a project team. Again, I've seen in the past, they've left it to 1 or 2 people to do, especially if you do an integration, it isn't going to work. Especially if this is a side project to their main job. You need to set up a team. You need to have within that team a member of the executive management team as your sponsor, because that's going to make it easier to get decisions and resources rather than having to wait to go up to the board of directors and then wait for them to have a meeting. If you've got a sponsor, a board of director as a sponsor on your team, you've got that conduit straight away. If you're implementing all 3, get people who are interested in it as part of your steering group. It doesn't have to be departmental managers. They're going to be part of the group at some point of the implementation. Look for champions within your company. It could be a programmer, it could be a secretary, something like that. Somebody who's going to be committed to help you. So set up a project team, very important. Let everybody know what you're doing. Change is the biggest problem in any implementation. A lot of people don't like to be told that new things are coming in, and then all find out that a new thing has come in and nobody's told them about it. Whenever we set up an implementation, whenever we work with clients in implementation, we always do awareness sessions before we do anything. An awareness session is normally about a 40-minute PowerPoint presentation on what we're doing, why the company wants it, how it's going to help the company, how it's going to help them in their job, and how they can contribute to the implementation and the continuement of that management system after certification. You start planting seeds, you start taking away the mists and the worry from them. You don't get the brick walls of I'm not going to do that because I didn't get told about it type attitude. So make sure everybody knows before you even implement it, especially so in integration, because you're going to be integrating a lot of information and you're going to be needing lots of information for other people, and they need to know, why are you asking me that question? Just plant some seeds, start getting them thinking, start making them part of their journey of this IMS, and things will go a lot smoother. You need to look for common ground. As we said at the beginning, the idea of these standards having the same format, it makes it easier to look for common ground. So what I do, or what I've done in the past, I've made this spreadsheet, and I've got this spreadsheet actually goes across not just these 3, but it goes to 27,000, 22,301, and it covers all of those off for me as well. But I've cut this one down so you can see 9, 14 and 45, and I've only got like 4, 5 and some of 6 down here because it goes on quite a bit, as you can imagine. I do this so I can look and identify where common areas are when I'm going to be setting up my gap assessment. So as you can see here, if we look at across the board, 4.1, so we look here, understanding the organization's context, it's the same in all 3 standards. The same as understanding needs and expectations of co-workers, 4.2 is the same. Scope of the IMS management system, the same. IMS management system and its processes, the same. All common ground. That means you could have one document that contains all the information that will cover all the requirements for those 3 standards instead of having 3 documents. Leadership. You notice 9001 has quite a lot. However, policy. The policy is the same in 5.2 for all of them. Now you could have 3 individual policies. Again, this is entirely up to you how you want to integrate it. But there's nothing to stop you having one sweeping policy that covers quality, environmental, and health and safety. Nothing stopping you at all. It's common, it's a policy. However, there are some areas that are individual to the different types of standard. So down here, 6.1.2a, environmental aspects, is only under environment. That would be a separate requirement. And again, on 6.1.2, hazard identification and assessment of occupational health and safety risks. That 45,001. So if you map the 3 requirements like this, you can quite quickly see where common grounds exist. Takes a little bit of time to do, but it's worth it because it's going to save you a lot of time in the later on down the line. So let's look at the steps about integration and implementing an IMS. There's 15 steps in all. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, and then we're going to pick out the pertinent ones. We're going to go into a bit more depth after we've gone through these 15 steps. So just bear with me as we go through this journey. So the best way to start, once you've got your team ready, you've got your project team, you've got your sponsor, you've done your common ground and looked at it, is to do a gap assessment. Find out what you have got and what you've partially got and what you haven't got. This is critical for an implementation. A lot of companies says, oh, we haven't got anything. I've been into lots of companies, and I'm sure my colleague who's listening will agree. Though you'll get companies say, oh, we haven't got anything. And then you go through the gap assessment and say, oh, yeah, we do that. I thought you said you didn't have anything. Yeah, we do it. Well, can you show me? Yeah, brilliant. You've got something. So a gap assessment based on the requirements of the standards will help you identify areas that you've got, so you don't need to worry about them. Areas that you've got something about, but it doesn't fully complete the requirement. And then areas where you haven't got anything at all. So the last 2 are the ones that you're going to be looking at to make sure that you've got covered off for your implementation. Next one is develop a project plan. Once you've done your gap assessment, you can see where the areas are missing. You can sit down as a team and work out how we're going to do this. In what order do we need to do it? My recommendation is follow the order of the standard. It's actually written in a way that the information in clause 4 feeds into clause 5. Clause 5 feeds into clause 6. Clause 6 feeds into 7, and then clause 8 feeds into 9 and 10. So if you follow the standard, if you look at a project plan that follows the clause of the standard, you can't go far wrong and you won't miss much out. But with your gap assessment and having that in mind, you can look and say, right, clause 4, we need to work out the scope of this management system. In fact, you need to work out the scope that incorporates 3 management systems. It's not quite as easy as it sounds, but it's doable. It's going to take us about 2 days to sit down, brainstorm that one, and then probably half a day, 2 days to document it, then have it checked by the management team to make sure they're happy with it. That's going to do 3 days. It's going to be you and you. Build your project plan up with what you're going to do, what you expect from the outcome, and who's going to be doing it, and the time frame. And I'll show you an example of this in a few slides. Define the context of organisation scope. That's the first one. This is clause 4. Think about what you're going to do and what it's going to cover within the business. This is what we talk about. The scope is what is it covering in the business. Identify interested party and the needs. This is a critical thing. A lot of companies don't understand it properly. When we talk about interested parties, we're talking about anybody internally or externally that can affect your management system and therefore your company. This includes being compliant with any legal requirements, especially if you're doing 14,000 and 45,000, making sure that you know the legal requirements. Any other stakeholders, could be banks where you got loans, it could be board of directors, could be an external steering group, it could be suppliers, big one there, external interested party. You've got to understand what they want from you or what you want from them, and then be able to identify how you're going to make sure they get it. It's an important thing that you need to understand because it comes in later on as well. Think about your policies. You need to have good policies. There's some golden rules about policies. There's 4 pillars on a policy. If you remember those, you can't go wrong. They're all about compliance, compliance to the requirements of the standard, compliance to the legal obligations and contractual obligations, compliance to customer requirements, and then compliance to the competency of your staffing. If you've got those 4 pillars inside your policy, then you're on a good track. But again, if you're having a combined one, you've got to make sure it encompasses both quality, environmental, and health and safety. Addressing risks and opportunities. This goes back to identifying the needs and requirements of interested parties. We've identified in step 4 who our interested parties are. We know what they want. We know what we want from them. We know how we're going to get it. Now we've got to look at what happens if we don't address it and we don't give them what they want, or they don't give us what we want. What are the risks to us? And what are the opportunities if we do that? If we do give them that, does it open other opportunities? Does it give us better sector market? So this is where we start to look at the linkages between clauses. So step 4 feeds into step 6, which is part of clause 6. Step 4 leads into clause 6. We then look at identifying and evaluating risks for quality, aspects for environmental, and hazards for occupational health and safety. But you could just call them risks if you want to. Now you could do this one of 2 ways. You can do it as individual registers, where you put your quality risks and business risks in one. You can do then another register for aspects, which are environmental risks and their impacts. And then another one for occupational health and safety hazards and their potential impacts. Or you could just have a combined one. What I've used in the past is a combined Excel spreadsheet with 3 tabs. And they're all there, all on one spreadsheet, but on 3 separate tabs. Nice and easy, especially if there's a linkage between an environmental impact that could have an OHS hazard. It's easy to link that way. Compliance obligations, legal and contractual. You make sure you've identified those. Again, it's easy to put those into a register, either as a combined register or individual registers. You need to have that for 14,001, it's a requirement, and for 45,001, that's a requirement, but it's not a requirement for 9,001. Define and set objectives. This is mandatory across all 3 standards. You can have individual objectives for 9, 14, 45. You could have some individual ones and some combined ones. It's entirely up to you, but whatever you do, they have to be SMART. SMART being specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and the most important one is time bound. If they're not SMART objectives or they're short-term objectives, by the time you get to certification, those objectives hopefully will have been finished and you're on the next set. Think about 12-month to 18-month objectives. 2 or 3 for each would be great to start with. Don't expect to do lots. Keep them simple, keep them SMART. But make sure you've defined them, you've agreed them, they're signed off with the relevant departments, and they're documented along with how you're going to measure them, how often you're going to measure them, and what you expect the outcome to be, because that's what an auditor will be looking for. Operation plan and control, this is clause 8. This is the big one. This is where you're going to get a lot of your SOPs are going to come in here, your standard operating procedures. The mandatory procedure, the only mandatory procedure for 9001 sits in here, which is the verification and validation of externally provided services and products, so supplier management. Supplier management is in 14 and 45, but it's not mandatory, but you need to address it. You need to show that you understand that they have an impact upon you within those standards. Also within 9001, you have a raft of other ones. This is where the difference between the three standards are. In 2008, and prior to 2008, 9001 was predominantly an ISO for manufacturing. It was purely designed on ensuring the quality of products that are manufactured for customers. In 2015, it was changed to encompass every sector of business. And all of a sudden, in clause 8, there was lots of clauses, sub-clauses in there that didn't actually fit different sectors of business. Say if you were a barrister's chamber and you wanted to do 9001, well, barristers don't actually design the law. They act within the law and they are therefore governed by government jurisdiction. So 8.3, which is design, they don't need to do that in 9001. The same with customer material. As a consultant, you may not be handling customers' material, so we don't need that subclause. So 9001 allows you to exclude clauses as long as you can justify it and not have them audited. The other two standards, 14 and 45, you must fulfill all of those requirements. So something to think about. 9001 is flexible enough so we can remove stuff that you're not going to do as long as you can justify it to an auditor. 14 and 45, you must fulfill all of those requirements. Supplier management is mandatory for 9001. It has to be addressed, but it isn't mandatory in 14 and 45, but you must have addressed acknowledge the fact that you have some control of your suppliers. Specifically in environmental, when you're looking at your first, second tier suppliers and their environmental impact upon your business, a little bit of carbon offsetting or something there. Clause 7 covers document control, resources and competencies. This is the same across the three standards. Apart from 9001, it goes into a bit more depth in 7.1, which is resourcing. But you can have this as a common theme across with some additional stuff for 9001 in the same documentation. Monitoring and measuring, important for 9001. This is where customer services come into it. Customer satisfaction sits in there, but it's not in the other two. Within the other two, they look at compliance within this section. How are you going to measure that your compliance with the legal requirements, statutory requirements, etc. Again, because they're very similar, you could have 45,000 and 14,000 as a single document because they're looking at the same legal requirements, and it could be a legal register. And in 9001, you're looking at customer satisfaction. It's a separate document again. Almost there. Internal audits and management review, standard across all ISO management systems. You are required, these are both mandatory, you are required to conduct internal audits on a regular basis to ensure the efficiency and effectiveness of your management system, and it must be documented in order for an auditor, a certification auditor, to come and check that you're actually doing it. The management review system has to be done. We recommend for a new company, for a company that's newly certified, you do it every 6 months. And then after your second certification, surveillance audit, go to annually. Or whatever suits you as a company. If you're a small company, just do it annually. But if you're a big company and you've got a lot of areas to cover, do it 6 monthly and split it down into 6 month chunks and make it easier. But they have to be done and they have to be documented. And then finally, before you go into your certification, do an audit yourself. Do a full check that everything you've done, get your gap assessment, get your project plan, and check that you've covered everything off. Check your documentation. Check everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. Check your objectives have been monitored. They've been checked that they were actually on time or on track. And if they're not, action plans have been in there. Check your risk registers. Has anything changed? Because this may be 4, 5, 6 months further down the line. Has something changed in that 6 months? That's either introduced a new risk or that risk has been mitigated enough that can actually be removed. This is your chance to just iron out any little wrinkles before the certification auditor comes in and does this 2-step certification audit. So those are the 15 big steps to implementing an integrated management system. Sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's doable, and it's doable a lot easier because the standards are very, very similar. So what we're going to do now is I just want to dive into some of these steps and give you an idea of what you can use and what you can do to do it. So let's look at the IGA, first of all, the integrated gap assessment. So what I did is I used the map, that Excel spreadsheet of standard clauses, to look at what I need to do, what requirements I need to look at to see what I've got or what I haven't got to work out a project plan later on. So from that, I've questioned what we've got. I've gone around the different departments and I said, right, have you got this? Have you got that? You said, yeah, I've got that. Show me. Oh, I've left it. If you can't see it, you don't do it. It's a non-compliant. It's as simple as that. You've got to be brutally honest because it's going to save you time at the end. And if you haven't got it, you haven't got it. It just means that that has to be planned in. What you get at the end of a gap assessment is something like we've got on the screen at the moment. This is a gap assessment for an integrated management system for 9,000 and 14,000. I did this late last year. It's a very long document. It covers every single requirement on both standards. So on my left side, I've got my area of the standard, the main clauses, and then the sub clauses. Within the sub clauses, there could be multiple choices, multiple sub requirements. I then look at that for 9001 and 14,001 as the requirements actually documented, as they are documented within the standard. And then I've got two lots of boxes. The first one, which is a 9001, and the second one, which is a 14,001. This is a company that had 9001, hadn't used it properly, but they wanted to integrate 14,000. And as you can see on the 9,000 boxes, 4.1, they're fully compliant with that because they've got 9001. They've already documented their context of organization. They know what they're doing and why they're doing it. However, on the 14,001 side, they haven't. They've not conducted a SWOT and pestle exercise to look at how that can their environmental parts of their business. So it was partially compliant. The next one down, the next subclause, it's not a requirement in 9001. However, there is on 14,001. It says such issues shall include environmental conditions being affected by or capable of affecting the organisation. It didn't have anything there, so it was non-compliant. And you go down each requirement for each standard, and then you have a choice of either fully compliant with evidence to say that they've got it. Partially compliant is we do it, we've got some checks and we've got some documents, but it's not fully documented or it's not fully implemented. It's a partial. Or if they've got absolutely nothing, it's non-compliant. And from this document, and for an integrated gap assessment of 3 standards, I would allow 3 days for a gap assessment and a report afterwards. It's not something you can rush. Do it properly because it will save you time later on. But you're going to use this document then to produce a project plan. Now this is a standard type project plan. We've taken the information from the left from our gap assessment and said, right, in implementation, phase 1 is the gap assessment. So we're on phase 2 implementation. Initiation, we're going to do a kickoff, a plan form kickoff meeting on Wednesday the 31st. Then we're going to discuss scope and intention for clients because it wasn't fully documented. That's going to be on Wednesday. That's going to be on Wednesday. Next one's on Wednesday. The following meetings, initial communication awareness. This is where we start talking about awareness meetings and how we're going to tell everybody in the company doing it. We've produced this project plan so we know what we're going to do, how long we estimate the duration is going to be, what day we're going to start and finish, name of the resources. Is it an estimation or is it dead on? So estimated, yes. Not estimated, no. Estimated number is on the side. We can now work out how long it's going to take us, we think, to implement this management system. This is phase 2. This is based on the output from our gap assessment. So it's important to do your gap assessment as honestly as possible to produce a project plan which is viable and effective for the implementation. Now, the project plan at the end of implementation doesn't mean that you're actually ready for certification. It just means that you've got everything in place and ticked off all the requirements. However, you should allow yourself a little bit of embedment time, a couple of months of embedment time, to make sure that what you're doing actually works properly. Because as you're implementing this, you're adding new things and new things and new things and new things all the way down this project plan. By the time you get to the end, you've said, right, that's it, we're fully implemented. But the people at the end who've just started doing their new thing, it's new to them. They need some time to make sure it's actually embedded. So at the end of implementation time, allow yourself some embedment time. And this is also a good time to start doing some extra internal audits to check A, that your internal auditors are doing the job properly, and B, that everybody is aligned to what's happening. So just bear that in mind. Implementation is only one of the phases towards certification. Phase 1 is your gap assessment, phase 2 implementation, phase 3 embedment, phase 4 certification. At the end of embedment, your pre-cert, phase 4 certification. Another reason for integration management system is documentation. If anybody remembers 9001 prior to 2015, it was so heavy on documentation. I think there was 8 mandatory procedures. God knows how many forms and checklists you had to have, policies for this and all sorts of different things. Somebody had a brainwave and said, we've got to make this simplified. So they simplified it down. The SL standard allow you to produce documentation that doesn't have to be in paper format now. It can be electronic, it can be a photograph, it can be a video chart, it could be anything. It has to be properly referenced to the requirements of the standard, which comes under 7.5 in all the requirements. But if you're going to integrate 3 management systems, don't have 3 lots of documentation. Why have a manual for health and safety and a manual for quality and a manual for environmental when they could all be combined into one combined manual? A lot of the procedures may have crossovers that will affect them within the standards. So an environmental procedure may have an impact upon a health and safety procedure and vice versa. So this is the point where you can actually combine procedures together and reduce the amount of documentation you're using. And what we're looking for is really a single pyramid instead of one pyramid, where you've got your manuals at the top. And I've got, in this case, 2 lots of manuals, but you could have one manual as an integrated manual system, a manual. Then we have our integrated processes and procedures. Then we have our integrated work instructions, and that is supported by the integrated documented information in the form of forms and checklists, etc., etc., etc. It just brings it all together. It reduces the amount of documentation that's floating around. It means you only have to have one reference system for your integrated management system instead of 3 or 2. It makes sense. And this is one of the reasons integrated management systems are becoming popular. It reduces the amount of paperwork. It reduces that paper trail for either yourselves to find or for an auditor to check. On the operational side, as I said, Clause 8 is the biggie. It's the backbone to all 3 standards. And it's important that when you start looking at this, first of all, look at the common ground. See what's in there that is the same across both. All 3, I should say, not both. Look at that and see where you can combine these SOPs, your standard operating procedures, your standard documentation. You need to plan and implement the processes needed to meet the IMS requirements or compliance requirements. Okay, because you may have a legal requirement to document something. Make sure you have that done. Plan, review the frequency of how often you're going to review your risk, your aspects, and your hazards assessments. An auditor is going to be looking at your risk register to see when was the last time you reviewed this. One of the things that I think I've picked up, and I know my colleague has picked up in the past with people, they say we've reviewed our document, we've reviewed our register, but there's nothing on the register to say it was last reviewed. So always put a last review date somewhere on it. So in order to say, oh, right, you reviewed it 3 months ago, brilliant, thank you very much. Otherwise, you're going to have to try and prove it to the auditor that you've done it, or it's a non-compliance. So think about how often you're going to plan it, how often you're going to review it, have a schedule of how often you're going to review it. Develop your supplier validation procedure. This is critical and it's mandatory for 9001. However, it's still part of 14 and 45, and it can be a combined document, a standard procedure for procurement, your vendor supplier questionnaire, initial one, your vendor supplier re-evaluation after a year, your vendor supply register, your white list and your grey list. The grey list are the ones that you would go to if you can't get one off your white list. If you have something like that in place and you show that to an auditor, that's an immediate tick in the box. But you've also got to you've got to show that you have actually been doing what you said you're doing. So if you say we review every 12 months each supplier, the auditor will be expecting to see a questionnaire for that vendor 12 months after the other questionnaire, and he'll look at the other one just to make sure they're within date. So do what you say. You can't go wrong. But it is mandatory in 9001 and it is in the other 2 as well. Finalize specific standard requirements for 9001, which is production and service provision. Change management within 14001 and emergency and incident responses in 14 and 45001. These are 3 separate areas within the standards that have to be in there. You can't just separate them out and just say, right, we're not going to do that. We'll cover it all in this. These are specific. These will have to be documented separately. Okay. And then Internal audits, as I said, this is standard right way across, but it's a mandatory requirement of all the standards that has to be done. And it's not much. You need to have a schedule. You need to have at least 2 internal auditors or outsource it to an auditing company that can come in and do your audits for you. And it has to be done, and it has to be seen to be done. So you've got to have audit schedule or audit plan. You have the audits, you have audit reports, and then you have non-conformity reports that could have come out of an audit if something was wrong. You've got to have that document in place, but it will be the same documentation across the 3 standards. As will the documentation, the agenda for 9.3, which is the management review. Again, this is a mandatory area. You have to do this. You have to document it within the standard. It actually explains what sort of inputs you're expecting and what sort of outputs you're expecting. It has to be done on a regular basis, and you will be audited against it, but it can be combined. Again, get the information in early. Make sure that you know what you want to see. It's in the requirements. It tells you what you need to be looking at. Get the staff to produce it the month before. Have it collated 2 weeks beforehand. Have it reviewed by the head of department the week beforehand. Have your management meeting that following week, and it's all done and dusted. Rather than have 3 separate management meetings throughout the year for each individual management system, if you're having an integrated management system, have an integrated management review as well. It just makes sense. And then finally on this one, improvement, which is continued improvement and non-conformity and corrective actions. These are exactly the same requirements across all 3 standards, just needs 1 set of documentation. Easy. So, in conclusion, having 1 integrated management system instead of 2 or 3 can make implementation not necessarily harder, but longer. A bit more thought has to go into it, because especially if you're looking at how processes cross each other, you've got to review all of that sort of stuff. And it could be a bit more resource intensive. You're going to need a quality manager, an environmental manager, health and safety manager as part of your implementation team. There's 3 resources. You've then got to look at the resources within the departments, etc. So it could be heavy on the resources, but if you've planned it out properly with your project plan, people will know when they're going to be required, when that person might be required out of the department to go and fulfill that. You've got to think about an IMS over the 3 standards, not just look at one, look at the other one, look at the other one. As I said, common ground. You look at common ground first, then you pick out the individual requirements that are generic. That is generic to the actual standard. At the end of this, it's been worthwhile because you will have an integrated management system that fulfills the requirements of all 3 standards, that increases your quality, efficiency and effectiveness, that safeguards your local neighborhood, your environment, and possibly global environment, depending on how you handle your supply chain, and ensures the safety of your staff and visitors, all under 1 roof, all under 1 documentation, all under 1 management system. So the other benefits of having it decreases the volume of documentation. You're not having 3 sets of different documentation. It coordinates, it gets you to coordinate activities and resources better. You can share resources better over an integrated management system. It helps you integrate workflow, helps you understand workflow activities a lot better. It also stops you doubling up on activities where you're doing this for environmental, and then along come OHAS and his hat, and he goes, right, we need to do this as well. You don't need to, you can combine that into 1 process. It makes systemizing information a lot more effective. It means it's easier to share information, it's easier to find information, it's easier to clarify information. A successful integration is going to give you an awful lot of benefits. It means a little bit of hard work to start with, but as you go through it, it gets easier because you get into the flow of things. Don't be put off by the time frame either. Your project plan will allow for it. You need to look at your future goal. Don't be scared of moving that goal backwards a bit to ensure that you're fully compliant before you go to certification. Nothing is set in stone. Okay, you've got to be flexible. There will be times when you come across something and you think, how the hell are we going to do that? Then you need to reach out to somebody who's done it before, have brainstorming inside, include everybody to get that sorted out. That's part of the process of embedding everybody within it by getting their buy-in. And it's well worth it at the end of it. How can we help as a company? Well, apart from the toolkits, and we have lots of toolkits for all of the main management systems, 9, 14, 45, 22301, which is business continuity, 27001, information security. We also have GDPR compliance, cyber essentials, and a couple of others that I'm sure that if you were looking for a toolkit, we've got the toolkits with all documentation at LBU. If you do go down that, we can supply a logo replacement service. Some of the toolkits have got like 120, 130 documents inside, which includes registers, forms, SOPs, policies. They've all got within them areas where you can put your company name and also your company logo. And if you're going to do it yourself, you could take a couple of weeks to do all of them. We can do this fairly quickly. We've got a bit of software that will take your logo, take your company name and populate all the documents for you. So that's a quick and easy win. We also provide consultancy. I'm one of the compliance consultants and ISO implementation consultants, along with my colleague Jerry, who's on the call. We provide either bespoke consultancy or ad hoc consultancy, so you can book an hour with us if you've got a problem and you can't get your head around something, or there's a requirement that you're scratching your head about, or you want an idea of how you could implement that. Then you can book an hour through the our website at your convenience, and then we'll join you for that hour and we'll talk you through it. We can also review 3 of your documents from the toolkits if you go down the toolkit thing. So you complete the documents, send them through to us, and we can review 3 of them and point you in the right direction, or just turn around and say, yep, got it, perfect there, well done. We can also provide ISO consultancy. Now we can do a pre-cert where when you've come to the end of your embedment period and you're looking for a check sum before you go for certification, you can book us, and dependent for an IMS, you'll be looking for 3 days, 3.5 days. We will come in and as auditors audit you as a certification body would audit you. It gives you peace of mind that when you do go for certification, everything's in place. It would also, what we do is we produce a full audit report. Any non-conformities, we will highlight non-conformities through an NCR, non-conformity report, and suggest with your team some corrective actions to get that in place. Because when you go for certifications, you can show the auditor that you've had an audit, that you found some non-conformities, however, you've actioned them and the actions are being implemented. That is a tick in the box by an auditor. You will not get marked down for that because you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's one thing we can do. Or we can act as a second party auditor, and working with your companies, we can come in and we can do your internal audits as an internal auditor, as your internal auditor against your departments, against your documentation, your processes and the requirements of the standard over a year, which is a normal standard reporting IA schedule. So we can help you in lots of different areas and your journey towards certification.